Hello, everyone. I'm Paulette Ross, Chair of Suffrage Forward, and I'd like to welcome you to The Power of Persistence, the first of 3 shows from Suffrage Forward to celebrate the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, formally giving women the right to vote. We'll also celebrate the contributions of women and men to not only the right to vote, but to feminism and the fight for equality that began long before 1920 and will certainly go on long after this year's celebration is over. You know, our history plays a tremendous part in who we are. The strength, resiliency, and yes, persistence of those women and men before us has and should inspire us today and into the future in the quest for equality. Tonight, in the first of 3 installments, we'll hear from a variety of people, some nationally famous and others locally known, who will bring you the poems, correspondence, speeches, art, and music created or inspired by suffrage activists and women's rights pioneers. So why don't we begin? As the wife and closest advisor to John Adams, as well as mother of John Quincy Adams, Abigail Adams advocated strongly for a voice and representation for women. Now, Abigail had very little formal training, but a great deal of common sense and courage. Performing an excerpt from her book, Remembering the Ladies, From Patriots in Petticoats to Presidential Candidates, is Carol Simon Levin, a librarian, author, and independent historian. Levin specializes in telling the stories of fascinating women in history through first-person portrayals. The book is not just a coloring book, but a collection of illustrations, fascinating facts, and quotations on 69 courageous women. And now, Carol will introduce us to the first of our women in our series.
On March 31st, 1776, I was minding family finances in our farm in Brainham, Massachusetts, when I wrote a letter to my husband John at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. In it, I urged that he and the other delegates remember the ladies as they drafted the new laws, warning that if they failed to remember the ladies, we were determined to foment a rebellion and would not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we had no voice or representation. Despite the fact that this was precisely what they were telling King George, he wrote back to me that I was so saucy, and the new laws in the new country would not give women much of a voice. With one interesting exception. On July 2nd, 1776, the Provincial Congress of New Jersey enacted a constitution granting the vote to all inhabitants worth 50 pounds proclamation money. By not explicitly stating white male, they implicitly enfranchised some women, African Americans, and aliens. I heard about this and wrote a letter to my sister later, stating that if the Massachusetts Constitution were as liberal as that of New Jersey, I most decidedly would vote for her friend. Now, even had I resided in New Jersey, I could not have actually voted, for I was a married woman, femme covert, covered in law by my husband. I was his property. I could not own property in my own right. But in New Jersey, there were many single women and widows who could and did vote. And they were even celebrated. The Newark Sentinel of Freedom enthused, "Now one and all proclaim the fall of tyrants. Open wide your throats and welcome in the peaceful scene of government in petticoats." Not everyone was pleased with these petticoat electors, however. A so-called friend to the ladies wrote in the Trenton True American, "Female reserve and delicacy are incompatible with the duties of a free elector. A female politician is subject to ridicule." Tragically, this experiment in expanded democracy ended in 1807. A hotly contested election led to accusations of voter fraud, including that men were dressing as women and voting, multiple times. But instead of prosecuting these election-stealing cross-dressers, the all-male legislature in Trenton limited the vote to white male citizens. Despite generations of activism, the women of New Jersey would not regain their right to vote for 113 years until the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. As for me, I never did vote, but I did serve as my husband's confidant and private political advisor, so much so that some of his political enemies said that he was under the thumb of a Mrs. President. If you would like to learn more about the many women of all colors and creeds who fought for women's rights in this country, please visit tellingherstories.com.
Sometime around 1797, Isabella Baumfree was born into slavery in Swartkill, New York. She would escape years later and had a vision to become a traveling preacher, and so changed her name to Sojourner for traveler, Truth to declare the truth to the people. Best known for her speech, Ain't I a Woman, this African-American abolitionist and women's rights activist during the Civil War helped recruit black troops for the Union Army, and then tried unsuccessfully after the war to secure federal land grants for former slaves. In her book, The Book of Life, Truth's contempt for pretension, wherever she found it, is shown in her piece On Women's Dress. Performing this piece is world-renowned vocalist, native New Yorker, and 2019 New York Bistro Award winner, Shirley Crabb.
I'm awful hard on dress, you know. Women, you forget that you are the mothers of creation, and that your sons were cut off like grass by the war, and that the land was covered by their blood. You rig yourselves up in panniers and Grecian bendbacks and flumeries. Yes, when mothers and gray-haired grandmothers wear high-heeled shoes and humps on their heads and put them on their babies and stuff them out so that they keel over when the wind blows. Oh, mothers, why, I'm ashamed of you. What will such lives as you live do for humanity? When I saw those women on the stage at the Women's Suffrage Convention the other day, I thought, what kind of reformers be you with goose wings on your heads as if you were going to fly and dressed in such ridiculous fashion, talking about reform and women's rights? Appears to me you had better reform yourselves first.
Pants. No other item of women's wear has had so much controversy. And no other item of women's clothing comes in so many variations with so many descriptive names. To name a few: pantaloons, bloomers, jodhpurs, culottes, jeans, skirts, capris, trousers, the list goes on. Why have women persisted in demanding the right to wear pants? Although the first woman to wear pants are unknown, an ancient vase, 470 BC, is illustrated with a female warrior, an Amazon, dressed for battle, wearing trousers and carrying a shield. And one of Joan of Arc's alleged crimes, leading to her death at the stake, was her wearing of men's leggings. Suffragist Elizabeth Smith Miller claimed to have designed Turkish-style pants known as bloomers in 1851. By the way, traditional acceptable women's wear in the mid-1850s could weigh as much as 15 pounds and restricted not only movement but breathing. In the late 1880s, women in the West, such as Calamity Jane, wore pants as a practical necessity. By the early 1900s, ease of movement was starting to become a fashion priority for women, and women began wearing pant-type garments, exemplified by the bicycle-riding suffragists and the pantsuit-wearing actress Sarah Bernhardt. However, the fight and the right to wear pants in public wasn't over yet. Actress Marlene Dietrich, who shocked the world when she wore a tuxedo in the 1930 film Morocco, was refused entry to the famous Hollywood hangout, the Brown Derby, because she was wearing pants. Other 1930s celebrities, such as Amelia Earhart and Katharine Hepburn, were frequently photographed wearing pants. World War II brought with it a new era of pants-wearing women, such as the Rosie the Riveters, who entered the wartime workforce, and by the post-war 1950s, women in pants began to lose a bit of its shock value. The women's rights movement of the 1960s ushered in an era of pants-wearing women both at home, in public, and in a few workplaces. Although Mary Tyler Moore insisted on wearing pants in the 1960s The Dick Van Dyke Show, other women who wore pants publicly were told to go home and had to come back properly dressed. Although the shock value of women in pants continued to decline in the late 1960s, Barbra Streisand's pantsuit at the 1969 Oscars was called outrageous. Well, it was sheer. And Representative Charlotte Reed caused a bit of an uproar when she wore pants on the floor of the House of Representatives in 1969. Who can forget Diane Keaton's menswear in the iconic 1977 movie Annie Hall, or Calvin Klein's 1980 ad, "Do you know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing," featuring Brooke Shields. What could be one of the last institutions to ban women wearing pants is the United States Senate, which in 1993 finally relented, allowing women to wear pants as long as the pants were accompanied by a jacket. And what woman doesn't envy the pantsuit wardrobe of trailblazers Ellen DeGeneres and Hillary Clinton? Much progress has been made since 1851, when suffragists wore bloomers, but the fight still isn't over. And last year, here in the United States, a federal judge struck down a rule at a North Carolina charter school that required girls to wear skirts and skirts, and that de facto prohibited them from wearing pants. Also, last year, a senior at a Pennsylvania high school fought the school board for the right to wear pants to her graduation ceremony. Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony had been friends and close allies for both abolition and women's suffrage since the mid-1840s. But after the Civil War, the relationship was strained when Douglass adopted a gradualist position and wanted to concentrate on rights for African Americans first. Their friendship survived their differences. Performing a poem from Shout, Poetry for Suffrage by Susanna Rich, are Bill Batson, artist and activist, and Marisol Diaz, artist and chair of the visual art department at the Dwight Englewood School.
I am Susan B. Anthony.
And I am Frederick Douglass.
I initiate the No Compromise with Slaveholders speaking tour.
I join you. Angry mobs press in. To keep order, the mayor of Albany has a gun on his lap.
Rioters throw rotten eggs.
They call us a deadly smallpox, a
horrible
horrible
plague.
plague.
The Rochester Union and Advertiser writes, we shall expect to see Mr. Douglass president.
And Ms. Anthony, Vice President of the United States.
We would have made a strong ticket. 1869, 15th Amendment enfranchises Negro man. but leaves his mothers, wives, daughters, sisters, and teachers without a voice. The amendment is ratified, essentially, with the black men in view.
When women, because they are women, are dragged from their homes and hung upon lampposts, then they will have the same urgency to obtain the ballot. This is the Negro's hour.
This is the woman's hour.
The right to her own voice belonged to women before she comprehended it. No custom, law, or usage can ever destroy it.
Every discrimination against women in the Constitution and laws is null and void, precisely as is every one against Negroes.
It is the ploy of pernicious power to pit the disenfranchised against each other, poor against poor, men against women, whites against blacks, women against blacks.
Our mutual affection and respect for each other is unbounded and eternal. With women's suffrage, righteous women will ensure universal suffrage.
When I ran away from slavery, it was for myself. When I advocated emancipation, it was for my people. But when I stood for the rights of women, self was out of the question. And I found a little nobility in that.
As Mary Boycom Chestnut writes, all married women, all children and girls who live in their father's houses are slaves.
We are together on the same stage at the National Women's Council, February 20th, 1895.
All day, you rub your left hand with your right, as if to rub out some numbness.
I always champion women's rights. I have done little in this world in which to glory except this one act, and I certainly glory in that. I tell my dear wife Helen how wonderful our meeting was. Collapsed to my knees, my heart.
Oh, dear friend, as you gave my father's eulogy in 1862, I stand up for you. At your funeral, I read Elizabeth Stanton's words for you, but I speak my own.
Welcome back. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Suffrage Forward and who we are. Over a year ago, artist Christina Biaggi and I got together with legislator Harriet Cornell and community activist and filmmaker Joe Allen to discuss the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. We decided that such an important event in American history should have a dedicated series of events and activities that acknowledge women's right to vote and to push onward to keep calling attention to the fight for women's rights. Lillian Morvay and Robin Rosenberg joined us, and our official steering committee was now launched. We created Suffrage Forward as a component fund in the Rockland Community Foundation to mark the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, not only to celebrate women's right to vote, but to empower women now and in the future, and to create awareness amongst all people of the strength and resiliency of girls and women. Despite the presence of COVID-19 in all our lives, our intent remains the same, and we will be working to bring visibility to the 19th Amendment so that we can celebrate both the actual anniversary of the amendment on August 26th and the quest for equality into the future. And now, back to the show. Spending a lifetime fighting for equality and to achieve the revolutionary goal of humanism, Gloria Steinem is a writer, political activist, and feminist organizer. She was a founder of New York and Ms. magazines and is the author of several books, including The Truth Will Set You Free, but first it will piss you off. Amongst her many achievements, Gloria was awarded the Lifetime Achievement in Journalism from the Society of Professional Journalists. In 1993, She was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, New York. She received the Freedom Award from the National Civil Rights Museum, the Eleanor Roosevelt Val Kill Medal Award, and in 2013, President Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor. President of the Ms. Foundation for Women, a national multiracial and multi-issue fund that supports grassroots projects to empower women and girls, she was a founder of its Take Our Daughters to Work Day. She works with the Sophia Smith Collection at Smith College on documenting the grassroots origins of the United States women's movement, and on a Center for Organizers in tribute to Wilma Mankiller, Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. It is an honor and a thrill to introduce, arguably, the most well-known and inspirational American feminist and one of my idols, Miss Gloria Steinem.
If you've ever wondered why the history of this country begins when the first Europeans showed up and not with the first Americans who created advanced civilizations here over at least 100,000 years, you won't be surprised to know that we learn next to nothing about the matrilineal and egalitarian Native American neighbors and the role they played in inspiring those famous upstate New York suffragists that we hear so much about, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and especially the more radical Matilda Jocelyn Gage. Be sure and look her up. They all knew each other, and sometimes they had Sunday dinners together with the Native American women who were their neighbors. It was they who provided the first vision beyond patriarchy and racism. If you think I'm making this up, read the great Paula Gunn Allen, the modern Laguna Pueblo scholar. She wrote, "Feminists who often believe that no one has ever experienced the kind of society that empowered women and made that empowerment the basis of rules and civilization. The price the feminist community must pay because it is unaware is confusion, division, and much lost time." Here is another of Paula Gunn Allen's phrases that we should all put on buttons and wear on t-shirts. "The root of oppression is the loss of memory." Even within my own memory, the first ever poll of women's opinions about the women's liberation movement showed that Black women were twice as likely to support that movement as white women. Now, think about the last presidential election. 96% of Black women voted for Hillary Clinton, and 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. So why is feminism and the women's movement so often depicted as all or mostly white? In the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., there is a lecturer who says, "There are two things, history and the past, and they are not the same." I hope that you and I can bring them way closer together. Thank you.
In 1971, Gloria Steinem founded Ms. Magazine. In the same year, she, Bella Abzug, and Betty Friedan organized the National Women's Political Caucus to support women seeking public office. On July 2, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act banning employment discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, or gender. The Battle of the Sexes. Bobby Riggs loses to Billie Jean King September 20th, 1973. After the match, King said, "I thought it would set us back 50 years if I didn't win." The FDA approves the first birth control pill on May 9, 1960, allowing women to control when and if they have children. Ora Mae Washington dominated two sports, tennis and basketball, winning her first tennis tournament in 1925. In 1932, she joined the Philadelphia Tribunes, one of the most dominant women's sports teams in basketball. I am the better writer, she the better critic, and together we have made arguments that have stood unshaken by the storms of 30 long years. Arguments that no man has answered. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. After witnessing the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, in which 146 women and girls were killed on March 25, 1911, Frances Perkins dedicated her life to the improvement of working conditions. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt appointed her Secretary of Labor in 1933. 22 years before Marian Anderson made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera, Katarina Yarborough debuted at the New York Hippodrome in 1933. Jane Bolin became the first African-American woman in the United States to serve as a judge when New York City Mayor LaGuardia appointed her to the New York City Domestic Relations Court in 1939. Felicia Rashad was the first African-American woman to win a Tony Award for leading actress in a play in 2004. The Equal Pay Act, which aimed to abolish wage discrimination against women, was signed June 10, 1963, by President John F. Kennedy. In 2019, the U.S. Postal Service announced that the esteemed journalist Gwen Ifill would be added to its Black Heritage stamp collection. A trailblazer in her profession, Ifill was the moderator and managing editor of Washington Week until her death in 2016. Suffragist Victoria Woodhull and her sister were the first female stockbrokers. Woodhull also was the first woman to run for the U.S. presidency in 1872.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was one of the longest first-wave suffrage fighters in history. In 1848, Stanton stood up and read out loud the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, shocking many people who strongly believed women should be seen and not heard. Stanton believed the best weapon any woman could have is courage. Legislator, author, television producer Colleen Jenkins will read from 3 letters at 3 stages in the life of her great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Colleen is vice president of monumentalwomen.org and is instrumental in the upcoming unveiling of the first sculpture of real women in Central Park, Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Hello, my name is Colleen Jenkins. I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Here's Elizabeth when she was 32 years old. She has 2 sons, and those are 2 of her 7 children. At this age, she delivered an address, the Declaration of Sentiments, in Seneca Falls at the first Women's Rights Convention. What was going through her mind? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I'd like to introduce you to Elizabeth and her daughter Harriet. Harriet carried on in the suffrage movement, and this is from The Solitude of Self. So what was going through Elizabeth Cady Stanton's head? Here are her words. The strongest reason for giving women all the opportunities of higher education, of the full development of her faculties, her forces of mind and body, for giving her the most enlarged freedoms of thought and action, a complete emancipation from all forms of bondage, of custom, dependence, superstition, from all the crippling influences of fear, is the solitude and personal responsibility of her own individual life. The strongest reason why we ask for women a voice in government under the laws she lives. In religion, she is asked to believe. Equality in social life, where she is a chief factor. A place in the trades and professions where she may earn her bread, is because of her birthright to self-sovereignty, because as an individual, she must rely on herself. Here's another photo of Elizabeth. She's in the middle, and here on the left, Harriet has grown up, and here's Harriet's daughter, Nora, who is my grandmother. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote to President Theodore Roosevelt in 1902, "Surely there is no greater monopoly than that of all men in denying all women a voice in the laws they are compelled to obey." So these are 3 quotes from Elizabeth. We have the vote. We have a public voice. There's an election coming up in November. Make sure you are registered and make sure you vote. Bye, and run for office. Bye.
Co-founder of the National Women's Party, Lucy Burns was a fearless American woman suffrage activist. Burns was arrested while picketing the White House in 1917 and was sent to Occoquan Workhouse, where she and fellow suffragettes were not allowed any visitors, cruelly force-fed, and very harshly treated. Performing the poem, I Am Lucy Burns, 1879 to 1966, hanging, from her book, Shout, Poetry for Suffrage, is Susanna Rich, professor, poet, and Emmy Award nominee.
I am Lucy Burns. History will know this cold, moonless night in 1917 as the night of terror. And you, prison guards, with your hot, rank breath on my neck, you who grab and shake me, you who twist my arm and manacle my wrists, the metal grinds tight, snaps shut, you yank my arms up above my head, chain them to these prison bars, slam the door inches from my face, the clang, the ring, the echo of iron banged into iron. I hang all night waiting. Shut up. You have shut me up. And my fingers, my hands, my arms burn as if poked by infinite needles. I throb. My shackles cut into my wrists. They are cutting off my hands. I ache. I hurt. I grow heavy. My arms fade to numb. My skin mottles blue. My ribs, my lungs, laboring, feet and ankles grown too weak now to raise me for each breath. This is not sobbing. This is struggle for breath, the need for, the fear of, sleep, choking. This is what the cross meant. This is what it meant to be hung on the rood, to lose feeling, to suffocate, my own weight pulling me down. You strip me of my clothing. I am an empty dress hung on a line. I am Susan B. Anthony. I have come to you in spirit, Lucy Burns. In November, 45 years ago, they came to arrest me too, and that time for casting a ballot. Seeing me as a lady, they were reluctant to treat me like a criminal, but I demanded handcuffs. I would not be denied the perfect image of my state, my hands tied. Feel them rise through yours now. Let our shackles clang like bells, and remember me. I am the Statue of Liberty, waiting in New York Harbor, trapped by water on all sides. I have no name, I cannot move. Still, I raise my torch, my arm ever aloft. Still, I cradle the book of freedom. I am the mother of exiles. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. I am Diana. I am the new moon. The sky is dark with shame this night. Why has the sun abandoned me? I'm not hiding, Lucy Burns, woman of light. I have turned into myself. I will cradle you. Wait for my return. I am Julia Emery. I in my cell across from you, Lucy Burns. Your red hair, a glowing sun in this gloom. Your white skin, a beacon of stars. I have beaten down the rats that would have crawled into our beds, and I am here. I raise my arms to mirror you. I raise my arms to be you, Sister Suff, valiant goddess, all the night long with you. Silent, silenced, we shiver with November cold and damp, yet our arms are torches, our hearts burn, and our fingers flicker like flames.
We hope you're enjoying part one of our series. Suffrage Forward is a nonprofit fund, and we would love to have your support so we may continue sharing amazing programs and events with you. With a $100 donation, Suffrage Forward will send you our exclusive commemorative tote bag as a gift for your support. Created by famed artist Christina Biaggi, this beautiful canvas tote highlights historical events and prominent women in the fight for women's voting right, culminating with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. The tote, designed by us in collaboration with Archery NYC, a woman's own business, is made entirely in the United States. Each side of the bag features one of Biaggi's iconic collage reliefs that depict notable suffragists such as Sojourner Truth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, along with many more. The art is meant to create a feeling of movement, to seem as if the women are converging on you, the viewer, and the carrier of the bag. For more information about the tote bags, the artist, and our organization, please visit our website, SuffrageForward.org. You know, there were several men who stood behind the women of the suffrage movement, and here's one that changed the course of history. The Suffrage Amendment still needed one more state for ratification when the Tennessee legislature met in special session in the summer of 1920. The Tennessee Senate had passed the amendment, so ratification rested with the state's House of Representatives. After weeks of intense lobbying and debate, on August 18, 1920, a motion to table the amendment was defeated with a 48-48 tie. The Speaker then called for the vote to ratify. It seemed certain the result would be another deadlock, but something changed. That morning, a son, Harry T. Byrne, received a letter from his mother, Phoebe Feb Esminger Byrne. And that letter, that changed everything. Performed by Dakota Green, actor and activist.
My name is Harry T. Byrne. I've been in the Tennessee House of Representatives for 2 years, and yes, I am the youngest to be elected to this office. And I want you to know that I have always been for suffrage as a matter of moral right. But today, August 18th, 1920, I had planned to vote against it, as I had done twice before, thinking that I would thereby represent the majority of my constituents in McKean County. I planned it. I even wore a red rose in my lapel, a symbol of the antis. That is, until I got a letter from my mama this morning. And I changed it just like that. When they called the vote, I blurted it out. I voted aye. I voted for it. I didn't want it to rest on me to be the one to cast the deciding vote, but it happened. When the reporters asked me what part of my mother's letter influenced me, I just read it to them. Here's what she wrote. Dear son, hurrah and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt. I noticed Chandler's speech. It was very bitter. I've been waiting to see how you stood, but have not seen anything yet. Don't forget to be a good boy, and help Mrs. Thomas Cat with her rats. Is she the one that put rat in ratification? Ha! No more from Mama this time, with lots of love, Mama. I knew that a mother's advice is always safest for a boy to follow, so I voted for suffrage, and I expect to stand firm.
Rosie the Riveter was an icon representing millions of American women who traded their aprons for overalls during World War II. This short video, created by artist and activist Penny Peace, pays tribute to an enduring image that continues to inspire. The music is by the Four Vagabonds and was aired nationally after being released in 1943.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women, for the lives of women have been more affected by its new horizons than those of any other group. Profound and stirring as have been accomplishments in the remoter fields of pure research, it is in the home that the applications of scientific achievement have perhaps been most far-reaching, and it is through changing conditions there that women have become the greatest beneficiaries in the modern scheme. Science has released them from much of the age-old drudgery connected with the process of living. Candle dipping, weaving, and crude methods of manufacturing necessities are things of the past for an increasing majority. Today, light, heat, and power may be obtained by pushing buttons, and cunningly manufactured and appealing products of all the world are available at the housewife's door. Indeed, beyond that door she need not go, thanks to the miracles of modern communication and transportation. Not only has applied science decreased the toil in the home, but it has provided undreamed of economic opportunities for women. Today, millions of them are earning their living under conditions made possible only through a basically altered industrial system. Probably no scientific development is more startling than the effect of this new and growing economic independence upon women themselves. When the history of our times is written, it must record as supremely significant the physical, psychic, and social changes women have undergone in these exciting decades. The impetus of the sociological evolution of the last half-century should be largely credited to those who have toiled in laboratories and those who have translated into practical use the fruits of such labors.
Inspired by a meeting with Susan B. Anthony and the indignity of her own mother's inability to vote, Nyack's Caroline Lexow Babcock changed hearts and minds in the progressive era leading up to the enfranchisement of women in New York in 1917. Reading a memory from Caroline Lexow Babcock is Catherine Fulmore, teacher, activist, and granddaughter of Caroline Lexow Babcock.
This is a memory written by Caroline Lexow Babcock to Isabel Savelle while she was writing Ladies Lib, How Rockland Women Got the Vote. Senator Brackett was in the New York State Senate representing Saratoga County during part of my father's incumbency and remained after my father had retired. They were close friends, and I like to think I inherited a small part of that friendship. Senator Brackett was chairman of the Judiciary Committee and president pro tem of the Senate, two posts which my father had held before him. He, like my father, had opposed it. Without Senator Brackett's support, it was practically impossible for a disfranchised group like the Women of New York to get the constitutional amendment granting them votes before the Senate. The day Senator Brackett announced his conversion to women's suffrage, the long, long struggle was won. The deadlock was broken. The Republican machine, headed by Boss Barnes, slipped quietly into the affirmative side. The Democrats, headed by Boss Murphy, were not far behind. An amusing episode in connection with the Republican State Convention of 1914 comes to my mind. It was held in Saratoga Springs. Barnes had a suite in the United States Hotel, the windows of which looked out on a balcony. On the floor below was installed Mrs. Harriet Stanton Blatch and other members of the Women's Political Union. Our windows were directly below those of Mr. Barnes. It was a warm night. All windows were open. Suddenly, we recognized the voices of Mr. Barnes, Senator H., and Senator Brackett. They were discussing the Suffrage Amendment. Others arrived. The voices grew louder. Every swear word which I had ever heard, and many I had not, every biblical allusion which could possibly be applied, was called into play. Brackett held the floor with all the eloquence he could so easily command. He shouted, he cajoled, he pled, and he won. Before sunrise, they had agreed to include among the resolution one endorsing submission to the voters of a constitutional amendment enfranchising women. Early in the evening, Mrs. Blatch went to bed, but I eavesdropped to the end and greeted her at the breakfast table with the news. Mr. Herbert Parsons, our knight in shining armor, was waiting to learn whether we wished him to press the issue on the floor. We told him what had happened, and he left to secure from that Republican convention the coveted endorsement which opened all political doors to the weary suffragists, so happy in their victory that they did not register then the beginning of the First World War. Senator Brackett's support of our cause his facing up to Barnes, an inscrutable and unbelievably powerful boss, his relentless pursuit of his objective, in season and out, brought us the victory. His contribution cannot be overestimated. Did we thank him as he should have been thanked? I can't remember, but trust Mrs. Blatch to give a most gracious and sincere acknowledgement.
Although unsuccessful as a candidate for the vice presidency, Geraldine Ferraro said it best in her 1984 concession speech. "My candidacy has said that the days of discrimination are numbered." This clip from her film Paving the Way is by Donna Zaccaro, filmmaker, founder of Dazzling Media, and daughter of Geraldine Ferraro.
Jerry was her usual straightforward self, called it as she saw it. I thought she was unfairly criticized, and yet I knew and she knew, we're not novices, we knew that it kind of came with the territory. But I was always proud to have her stalwart, outspoken support.
When I walked into the booth on Election Day, she was going to do what I couldn't do. And I looked up at her name, and I swear, Susan B. Anthony was standing beside me. It really, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, I'm sitting there saying to myself, they're saying to me, pull it. Oh, of course I'm going to pull it. But all of a sudden, I felt that all the work that had been done, you gotta give me a minute. Let me get off of this for a minute. I felt the work that had been done for over 100 years was finally reaching fruition. It was the first and only time I ever cried when I voted. I didn't cry when I voted for myself in 1984, though we knew we were going to go down. It was probably one of the proudest moments of my life, was being able to pull that lever for a woman for president.
She talked to me about what was really important in life. And she said, you're out there running for president, and I really want to see you win, and I'm going to do everything I can. But she said, we all have to be reminded about what's really important in life. When it comes to the hard stuff, you have to stand up for the people that you love, no matter what the world says. I am very grateful because that was important to me in my own life.
I'd like to thank all the women and men who participated in the show tonight, and a special thanks to Miss Gloria Steinem. May I remind you that there are 2 other segments of Power of Persistence. Thursday, August 6th at 7 p.m. for part 2, and the third part, Tuesday, August 25th at 7 p.m. You also may view this series on YouTube, Facebook, and SuffrageForward.org, where you can find more information on the women and men presented in this series, our tote bag, and our organization. The struggle for voting rights and for equal rights has been a part of our lives since the founding of our country. Having the right to vote is only a part of that struggle, but a key part. And that is why all of us at Suffrage Forward urge every one of you to vote in November's election. So many brave women and men fought through the years to make sure women could vote. Well, let's pay them back by all of us getting to the polls. On behalf of all of us at Suffrage Forward, have a pleasant evening, and we'll see you next time.